I think the biggest myth is probably that what's behind a great startup is a great idea. Fundamentally, it's about really, really hard work and resilience. When an exit is on the cards, it's almost like a history of the company as various different people who are shareholders who might have been upset in the past or might have left on bad terms, they all come back. So it just re-emphasizes the need to try and do things as cleanly as possible as you go, because when people sniff cash around the company again, there's an extra incentive to come back and say, you didn't do the right thing by me.
Hi everyone, welcome to 23 Mile with me, Kayode of Delaware. The venture world sells a very sexy dream. Raise venture capital, scale quickly, achieve massive exits. The data tells a different story. Only 30% of companies that raised Series A in 2021 made it to Series B within 4 years, which means 70% either shut down or become zombies. My guest today is Charlie Fletcher, who advises founders all the way across their scaling journey from fundraising to exits. He's there when the going is good and is a trusted partner in not so good times. As partner and head of corporate technology at Mishcon de Reya, Charlie and his team advised on over 100 M&A and fundraising transactions in 2025 alone. On the show today, we're discussing the state of venture in the UK, why founders should run dual-track fundraising processes, and we'll uncover mistakes that cost founders dearly. Charlie, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Cody. I'm delighted to be here on the 23 Mile podcast.
Starting with your recent race. Congrats on the half marathon.
Thanks so much. So I know you're a runner yourself.
Yes.
You're out of the leg cast now. I do the half marathon every year. Every year I do it a little bit more slowly, but that's getting old. I'm still very proud to achieve it.
To keep moving, that's the spirit. And fingers crossed, I'm able to join you next year. So yes, it's a business podcast, but it's called 23 Mile for a reason. So yes, we'll come back to this. As going into the numbers, your team worked on over 100 transactions in 2025. That is an amazing accomplishment, but it also means there is not a slowdown. Is that driven by AI, or what's behind your numbers? Take us behind your numbers.
Yeah, so AI is a big theme of investment. It's the hot area right now, as we all know. And no matter what startup you're building, you will have a plan for incorporating AI and in many ways making your startup, utilize and center around AI, because ultimately AI is doing things more efficiently. And all that most startups are trying to do is find a new way of doing things more efficiently. So it's a very natural and obvious thing for folks in the venture world to focus on. But it's different by sector. Actually, it hasn't been, such a buoyant time necessarily in the life sciences world recently. It can be more difficult to raise money in more capital intensive sectors, in high value manufacturing, in some areas of deep tech, which, people will see as high risk. And, it's still a challenge to raise money in those sectors. The best companies will still be able to do it and the best founders will still be able to do it. But it's not an even picture across the board by any means.
Very interesting. We'll come back into that whole difficulty of raising and what it means for founders and their investors. You talked about the fundraising. What about the exits and the other types of transactions within that whole activity? Can you give us a sense of that split between fundraising and exit?
Yeah, so we do both. And, every year we work on lots of fundraising deals. But where we are in the cycle is that 2021 was a high point for venture valuations. We had a kind of reversion to the mean, if you like, as things, moved away and down from that high point. There hadn't been tons of confidence and optimism in the exit market in the subsequent years. And in fact, M&A deals were by most measures down, in 2025, for example. But there's good news. In 2026, we're seeing loads of processes underway, loads of deals. Some have closed already and some are in the process of closing. And actually something has happened that means there's a lot of cause for optimism, I think, in 26.
Fingers crossed it all pans out. But yeah, let's go back to the beginning a little bit, so to speak. I grew up in Nigeria, and we had this kind of lesson where a lot of people would, coming out of high school, don't like numbers, they're very smart, just say, you know what, I'm just going to go into law. Was that it for you, or what was the driver for you going into the legal profession?
Oh, well, that's a bunch of things, maybe a little bit of not liking numbers. But yeah, so for me, I always enjoyed the schoolwork, all aspects of study. And actually law was a way to kind of capitalize and grow from that. But what I didn't really realize when I first went into law was all the reasons I should have gone into law, which is that fundamentally it's not about study or technical detail, although that's important. It's about people, exceptional situations, good and bad, and helping to manage, sensitive, challenging, sometimes very positive situations, whether it's at board level or as an intrepid founder, trying to make your company survive and thrive, or as an investor investing someone else's money and, being able to, look after it as if it was your own. So it's those people who, are our client base and our network that are absolutely the best thing about this job. And it's not spoken enough about to young people coming into law.
I will come into that because there's this whole thing again, back to the AI thing. What does it mean for careers? We'll come back into that. But back to your story. How did it pan out for you? Did you always have a sense for corporate law, or what? How did you get into that space after school?
Yeah, so when I first started my training contract with the law firm, trainees in the UK do different seats of 6 months, or in some places 4 months, in different parts of law. My very first one was in a corporate team, and I loved it. I loved the thrill of the deal. I loved some of the occasionally boardroom drama. I loved the stories behind the companies and entrepreneurs, trying to build special things. And I've been there ever since.
Very interesting. Mishcon de Reya, if I recall correctly, you got it through an acquisition of another firm you worked. That's right.
Yeah, that's right. So I was with a firm called Taylor Vinters. At Taylor Vinters, we'd had a really strong focus on technology and innovation and the venture capital and startup space. The combination with Mischon was too good an opportunity to turn down, because Mischon had a whole load of additive services we could bring to our clients around next level in disputes, things like data, blockchain, investigations, fraud, and all of these things that a boutique law firm can't offer. Mischon was able to give us access to. And the most beautiful thing about the synergies around the merger was Mischon's incredible network as well. So through the Mischon network, we have access to opportunities, and we're able to help people that we just wouldn't have been able to do before.
And you touched on something earlier on about how law is more about relationships than anything else. Has it come into play where you're advising founders on M&A and you can call on your own experience on the acquiring side?
Yeah, it's for sure. Just in case, as a lawyer, you're in any danger of thinking that a successful deal is all about a contract negotiation. There's just way more to it than that. It takes time, it takes patience, it takes next level communication, and like small things can mean a lot. So, I mean, the analogy I would use is to like an organ transplant. It can be an incredibly good thing done for all the right reasons, but it's not an easy thing to get right. And it's not an easy thing in the moment of doing it. And in the process of doing our own combination and, having lived through the change beyond the legal aspects of the deal, it's brought a whole extra level, I think, of understanding to the way I would talk to clients about approaching an acquisition, a merger, an exit, because there is, more to get right than the legals alone.
I think it's definitely an advantage being an advisor to companies and founders having worked the journey. I mean, I kind of share a bit of that as well. I built a tech startup that failed. Now I'm working with founders and say, I want to help you so that you don't feel like I did. So I find that whole relationship and personal opinion very useful. And before we move on, something you also touched on was law, what you've learned now. How do you see, what would you tell someone going into maybe finishing high school and considering a career and thinking AI is going to take over the world? What should I do?
Well, there's a few, and I do quite regularly, I get asked for advice from people going into law. For one, you need to have some mastery of AI. That doesn't mean you can buy your concert tickets or graduate. It means you need to have a deeper understanding, especially of some of the additional functionality of some of the specialist tools. And you need to have a deeper understanding of the risks of using it. So many lawyers and others have been caught out by using AI in an unguarded way. So people need to understand that. And there are some actually really good short courses out there which can help people get to that point. And then the other thing I'd say is, there might have been a time when being an emerging lawyer was all about tasks and doing those tasks really well. For a corporate lawyer, preparing board minutes, company's house filings and such like. Actually, more and more, you can use AI to do that much more cheaply and much more quickly. And we need more from our emerging talent. So actually, it's even more important than ever that emerging lawyers have got great people skills, great ability to understand nuance, great ability to see that what humans can do better than AI, at least for the time being, is to come up with a strategic plan that really understands many different dimensions of a situation, and then to use really considered communication to actually help that plan come together in the way that an AI tool just can't right now. AI does have its uses because it will always speak the truth to you, but that's not always what people want to hear.
So you're not buying that, the narrative that AI is going to take all our jobs?
Well, not yet. It's a probability tool, and by working in partnership with AI, you can get the best of both worlds. I think it will be some time before AI can actually advise people on a complicated legal situation in isolation. If I was to use it now and ask what the law was on a company law point, if I asked ChatGPT, it would probably give me a composite of Australian, Indian, English law considerations and legislation. It has been known to hallucinate case law. This is not ChatGPT specifically. And, the quality of the prompting matters. Of course it does. But actually, there is also the risk that the unstructured data on the internet that most AI systems draw from isn't necessarily verified and validated in the way that a more pure data source could be.
I mean, I take a more cynical view that AI will never get there. That the best, because what I think is going to happen is these tools will get so good, but it will, if I try to use it to solve a legal problem, I say, I don't want to pay you. I'm going to get into trouble. But you and your team can use those tools and get ahead. On the other hand, if I have an expertise in structuring corporate finance deals, in building financial models, if you also try to use and say, oh, you don't want to pay me, or let's do it ourselves, you're going to get in trouble. But I can use those tools. I can get the best out of those tools. So that's where I think the world is going, but we'll see.
Exactly. And it's a productivity tool.
At the end of the day, yes, it's just a product, and based on what you know, based on judgment, and like you said, ignorance. Okay, let's move on to the whole fundraising a bit, which things are getting interesting. You've written a lot in the past about that bridge that is breaking between Series A and B and between B and C. Maybe a little bit of background. Where did you start seeing this problem?
Well, essentially, when we saw a little more capital scarcity after the 2021 retrenchment, I say capital scarcity, what I mean is more reluctance to deploy capital to new investments. Lots of funds were focusing on existing investments and their further funding requirements, which meant that it was harder for companies to raise follow-on rounds. So there were ways of doing it, but what we saw were generally, more protective terms to investors. There was definitely a hardening in terms, not just around valuations, but in deal terms more generally. We also saw new entrants to the market, like family offices, and we saw, some return of strategic investors who really needed to be bringing through innovation in their sector. And all of those things added up to, if you were, a growing company, perhaps it had raised angel or seed finance, and you needed to find an institutional raise in, let's say, 2024 of new money for the first time. It was just more challenging than it had been a few years earlier. The money was still there in many cases, but it just wasn't as easy, and the terms were generally more robust.
Very interesting. And how have you advised founders, or have you seen founders and venture-backed teams deal with this problem?
Well, there are a few things we've seen. One is trying to do more with less. So trying to be more capital efficient and maybe just delay a venture raise for longer. It doesn't always stack up to do that, because the whole point of a venture raise is to get you, enable you to get further faster. And some propositions were more conducive to that than others always. And the balance as to whether you venture raise or not often depends on the terms you're raising on. So we did see some people, actually revert to a more traditional approach where they tried to maximize, some alternative revenue schemes, maybe divest some non-core IP. We saw a number of people demerge their businesses, and so that they could actually have a clearer proposition for their core business and some of the other interesting things as a way of finding value in the business and attracting investors. And then the other thing we saw that you and I have spoken about in the past is, some people would actually exit early. So if you were struggling to raise a Series B or C, you might think, what, if I found a strategic acquirer, I would have, access to capital, new routes to market, a whole load of central resources, which would be really helpful to me. But I could do it on terms where with, an earn-out element, I still get a big slice of the upside. So there were a lot more of those kind of early exit deals in that period than maybe we'd seen in the run into 2021.
You've talked about the dual fundraising, dual track.
Yeah.
How have you seen it work out in practice?
Yeah. So sometimes it works out well because, people can find, an attractive proposition, a new investor, new money, a new lead on, terms as if everything were normal and there was no particular urgency, to the fundraise. And, folks in the venture space, they're not impressed by it, but they're not unaccustomed to the fact that, companies have a cash runway and need to raise money. And then, sometimes we've seen actually those processes not work out, and we've seen reluctant followers, existing investors who will reluctantly follow their money, do so on, very dilutive terms with kind of pay-to-play structures to punish the other investors who did not back the company. And in some cases, dilutive to management or former members of management. And then the other thing that might sound like a very bad thing, because obviously we don't want businesses to fail, is that ultimately at the end of a process, you do have to have a plan for palliative care for that startup if it hasn't worked out. And you need to actually be mindful, if you're a director of a company, which is entering the zone of insolvency, of your responsibility. So there comes a time when it's not working and you can't find an exit or a fundraise, where you would start talking to insolvency practitioners to make sure you actually cleaned things up, and did everything in compliance with the law.
Like you said, that last end of the road, which nobody wants. Do you see a situation where there are well-funded teams, raised a lot of funds in the past, they're now running out of cash runway, but they have not prepared enough, or they have not been responsible enough in planning for either a soft exit or cut to profitability, and then they end up on a chopping block?
Yeah, we do. And that this is why it's really important to forecast and reforecast and look at, how you're using your cash. Remember, if you raise venture money,
Yes.
every pound of that money you raise that you spend on the business, you want it to turn into more than the pound in value.
Absolutely.
So you've got to, you can't just spray it around. You've actually got to be really discerning to make sure you're building value with that money. So we did see, some people cutting costs and trying to make their pound go further. Actually, things are maybe a bit more buoyant now. Obviously people aren't wasting money still, but it was really noticeable how people were trying to cut their cloth to reflect the fact that there was maybe a bit less capital on favorable terms than there had been in the past.
And how have you seen investors like VCs relate to the situation where things aren't going so well? Are they generally supportive of these other options, or do they just let the status go?
We've seen a variety of responses, and this is why, when you get an investor on board, you kind of need to get to know them and, do some background checking, ask around, and ask people who've been in their portfolio how they've dealt with it, if things haven't worked out. Most VCs, I genuinely think, have got loads of integrity and will, do the right things and totally accept that things won't always work out, but their whole brand is dependent on being ultimately in the corner of founders when times are hard as well as when times are good. Just occasionally we saw some, investors who were, reluctantly following, and then, as I say, insisted on doing so on more punitive terms. And you can understand the rationale for that as well, but it's not a very pleasant situation to be in on the company or management side.
Tough for everyone. But what would you say to a founder raising a large Series A, Series B round today? Say AI, they've been able to raise. What will you say to them? Try to grow, reach the next round, reach the next milestone so you can raise. Try to reach profitabilities or something in between.
I think you need a bigger plan. So just to first principles, when you get external investment on board in the venture space, you are committing to a kind of exit target timeline, so they can get a return. So you need to think about where that return is going to come from when you do your very first deck, when the company has just started, the business doesn't really exist yet. You need to start thinking about, strategic acquirers, if that's what's going to happen, or, exit to private equity, maybe an IPO, although we haven't seen so many of those in recent years. So you've got to have that foresight about what that journey entails. And in order to keep that up, there are a few things you need to do. One is you need to be exit ready. So you've got to make sure that you're kind of ready to be due diligence at any time. Problems from an exit point of view include things like disputes. So classics, including disputes over who owns the IP in your company, or disputes with ex-members of staff or ex-founders. Other problems include, if you've got a dysfunctional cap table, maybe, or you've got, a preference stack that makes your company very hard to sell. You've actually got to be proactive and deal with those things. You can't just leave it out there, because a company that's hard to sell because of any of those things would also be hard to get investment in.
Very, very interesting. I mean, getting into the exits, I think there's something you said, I think in our last chat as well, talking about exits don't just happen, you have to engineer them. You've touched on a few points here, but how does a founding team or, management team, the investors, how do they engineer an exit?
Well, there's a bunch of ways. One is you've got to have that mission in the back of your mind all the time. You're building something to sell. In order to sell something, you've got to make it as valuable as possible. It goes without saying. You've got to find a buyer. Preferably, you've got to find multiple buyers who'll provide some competition so you get the best terms. If you've reached the point where you think now is the time to sell, you can also look at running a process. So there is a default option where you appoint corporate finance advisors and lawyers and run a process, a little like an auction,
Yes.
where they go out to the market and let the whole market of potential people, which might be a few hundred people globally who they think would be great acquirers, let them know that you're available and you're open, to discussions. And, quite often we see companies kick off that process for all the right reasons without really knowing, who their buyer would be just yet. And it's a tried and tested route of getting to market and finding a potential buyer. Obviously, the more you know about who your buyer is likely to be, then the more focused a process you can run, the more you can select the right corporate finance advisors and target the right people in order to get enough interest around what you're doing. And then I would just say as well, I know as a founder, you might well feel like you spend all your time networking, too much time doing panels, events, drinks, and such like. But you've got to make sure that time is impactful, because there's a fair chance that some of the people you meet networking might be potential acquirers of your company. So you've really got to curate that network as well as possible so that you can have the most reach possible when you want to actually go ahead and push forward an exit process.
It goes back to that thing you said about no matter what our business is, it's all about people. Right?
100%.
I've seen founders, so I've done a bit of work, corporate finance with founders, venture-backed founders, and I see this, I wonder if you've seen the same thing, where founders run their fundraising themselves most of the time. They feel they can run an exit process. I see your face. What are your thoughts about that? Founders trying to run a proper exit process themselves?
Yeah, so some founders can do that. I don't, on average, and every situation is different, I don't think we would advise it. There is a reason why corporate finance advisors get paid a lot of money to run exit processes. They should make it easier, for you as a founder to focus on the most important things, the sell, keeping the business running while you're running a process, which is no small task. But also, if you get a third-party advisor on board, they know the market. It comes much more naturally to them, and they just have a whole load of value to add around how you run your negotiations, how you run your marketing exercise, and what you can expect in terms of deal terms.
Amazing. And just to emphasize that point, founders have to keep the business running. They have to. I tell founders, you need to run an M&A process, wanting to sell, but not having to sell. And that means running a tight ship, meeting your KPIs, running the business, and letting the advisors do their part. But yes.
Well, you're 100%. So they do say the best time to raise money is when you don't need to.
Yep.
And it's kind of the same for the best time to sell your company is when you don't need to, because you need to have the ability to walk away and say, this isn't right. So on both counts, if you find yourself pushed into either a sale or a fundraising because of cash constraints or your investors or anything else, then, it's
not the right time. And if you have to do it and you push ahead with doing it, the outcome is most likely going to be suboptimal. But maybe diving into some of the legal issues around the exit processes. What are some of those mistakes that founders make that make you go, why are you doing this? What are some of those issues?
Well, a couple of things. In fact, just two things. One is quite often we get brought in as lawyers once heads of terms have been agreed. We've actually got a bunch to add in terms of deal terms. We see lots of transactions, and we take a lot of pride in like delivering a bit of extra value and helping founders think about things that they might not have thought about. And bear in mind that obviously they're repeat entrepreneurs. Yes, maybe a super repeat entrepreneur would have done 5 exits. We do more than that in half a year. So we live this and we know how it works, and we have a load of value to add there. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is when an exit is on the cards and you have to go and deliver it, it's almost like a history of the company as various different people who are shareholders who might have been upset in the past or might have left on bad terms or might have thought, what, I've got a claim against this company, but I can't be bothered to bring it now. They all come back. Ooh. So it just re-emphasizes the need to try and do things as cleanly as possible as you go, because when people sniff cash around the company again, there's an extra incentive to come back and say, you didn't do the right thing by me, or I own some of your IP, or you promised me some shares that you never gave me. So you really, really want to avoid that scenario. It does make things much harder.
And so let's we're talking about exits, those problems that can stop deals. Maybe we can roll back the clock a bit now. So if I'm a seed stage founder, Series A, and I'm planning for an exit, like you said, think of an exit in mind, what are some of those things I need to be mindful for from either a deal or a legal point of view at the fundraising stage to ensure that we don't have to roll back and fix things later on?
Well, going back to what I said about always being kind of ready to exit if the window opens or the opportunity opens. I think it's really good practice when you're fundraising to model an exit waterfall and really understand, what's in it for you and for all the stakeholders, and how people, will be motivated to support an exit at different levels. One of the other things that occasionally we find is that there hasn't been any exit modeling for some time. And then, early investors or ordinary shareholders suddenly realize that, an exit at the likely valuation, there's nothing in it for them. We end up with, situations where people don't really want to cooperate or give warranties. So I think it's really important that you do have that, the fact that an exit is coming from the very first time you raise money, you have that on your agenda. And then I would say, look after the people around you. Shareholder relations are really important in private companies. Share information updates, have meetings. It needn't be a formal legal thing. Help people to feel invested and in your corner. And it will make it much easier when, you need to call them and say, we want to actually sell the company. We want you to sign a share purchase agreement. If, they're part of the mission and it's not an out of the blue thing. It's not easy to do when you're a busy entrepreneur, but actually those relationships are really important. It's never a good thing if you need to rely on the drag along. It can be done, but it's something that's best avoided if possible.
Moving on a bit, I see that Mischon has was it a Mischon to the US program? And tell me about that and why that's in place.
Yeah, so if you're, an entrepreneur with a fast-growing startup, it's a tried and tested path to try and get a toehold in US markets much of the time. What we've seen in London is lots of US firms come over to get involved with our UK startups and bring them to the US. But actually, we're very proud to be independent and ultimately a London-based firm with a global outlook. And we can help British and European entrepreneurs go to the US as well. So we really wanted to shine a light on that. And we've done a first cohort of founders in our network who are considering US expansion, really to, give them some briefing and give them some tools for doing it as effectively as possible. And I want to put a shout out to one of my Mischon partners, Chris Driscoll here, who is a US attorney, has got very serious credentials in technology and innovation from having worked with large US law firms. And he can be a really valuable voice, from London to entrepreneurs seeking to make that journey, because he's seen it countless times.
You talked about the expansion into the US, but you also see a lot of your clients, the startups. Have you seen any successfully raised in the US?
Yeah, we do see that quite often. I don't think this is true across the board, but a lot of people will tell you that valuations are way higher in the US. There's way more capital, and it's just easier to raise funds. In order to do that, to raise money in the US, you will often find that your US investors will suggest that you consider doing what's called a Delaware flip. So you switch from your local incorporated companies, or in this case, an English limited company, if you've set up with one of those in London, to having a Delaware top co, and all of your existing shareholders in the original company will swap their shares for shares in the Delaware company. And the reason why some people choose to do this is because it's familiar as a structure to US investors. It's familiar to counterparties in the US. They don't have to try and figure out what you are in terms of corporate structure. And the argument goes that it makes it easier also to exit because people know what they're buying with the Delaware. As I say, I'm not sure that all of that is true, but we do see people doing it and do raise money either by doing that or by not doing that. Lots of US investors will invest in local corporate structures, but the flip definitely happens.
Interesting. I mean, to that point, the US is by far the biggest venture market in the world. There's been a lot of negative sentiment on the UK, I'll say, maybe in the past few years. But I've noticed in the past few months now, there's a lot more positivity around the London and the UK venture space. How do you see things panning out in terms of that gap between the UK and the US in terms of growth?
Yeah, so in the UK, without a doubt, just as in the US and in other places, we do have some of the smartest people of the world growing incredible companies. Now, it's important not to be complacent about that and make sure that conditions are right for growth. But there is still a case for doing it in the UK, maybe even compared to the US, the Valley, the Bay Area, in some cases. So we have great human capital, we have great availability of talent. We still manage to attract some of the smartest people across Europe and beyond to London to start their startups. Why does this happen? Well, London's a great city. We have really well-established investor and founder networks and support around. We have that kind of human capital availability. We have incredible research firepower as well. So, we've got great universities. A lot of policy attention has been on the arc between Oxford, London and Cambridge. But also, we've got some great venture activity going on in the north of England, Scotland. So there's some really cool things happening in Manchester in the venture space there, which is really moving on to the next level. And for example, in Edinburgh, there have always been incredible life sciences companies growing out of the university and research in Scotland. So we have really specific areas where over time we've got like some really strong like mastery of given domains, which is as good as anywhere in the world. And that's why, even though it maybe has been a bit of a challenging time for the UK, since Brexit, and with some of the trends in geopolitics and some of the trends in domestic politics, actually it's still a really attractive place to come. And we still see, people choosing to, found their businesses in the UK ahead of, a bunch of other places in the world they could go.
I don't know how terminally online you are, but on Twitter or X now, there's this trend called London Maxing, where it's just a lot of people getting on board and saying, come to think about it, London is a great place to build a business. So I'm bullish on it, and let's see how that goes. But you talked about that arc. I mean, when I met you, it was for an event in your Cambridge office. Mischon is also really embedded in that Cambridge scene and promote venture there. Let's talk about Cambridge a bit. There's obviously the world-class schools there. How do you see the whole interaction between that arc between London, Oxford, and Cambridge?
Yeah, so it's really important. I mean, innovation is not exclusive to that arc. Neither is entrepreneurship, but you do have, incredible research universities producing innovation, which in turn produces smart people who've got, technical backgrounds, who can, work in innovative places at the cutting edge, whether it's in a startup or a large corporate or a consultancy. You've got people with like really genuinely next generational skills that not many other people have. So that's really valuable. But the other thing I want to say, people don't realize this. Just take Cambridge for an example. 38% of the population of Cambridge were born outside of the UK.
Wow.
It's a global city. It's a small global city. But what that means is that Cambridge is attracting all of those people from around the world who are generally attracted by the research opportunities in their chosen field and the ability to work, in their technical niche. And that's a really valuable thing. It's something we should celebrate more. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why, in terms of a UK-wide plan for growth, people are looking very carefully at what it is that, the London Maxers and Oxford and Cambridge are doing in sync to attract all of these incredibly valuable people and help them grow really valuable things, and double down on it, but also try and replicate it elsewhere in the UK.
Very interesting, very nice. I mean, I'm bullish on it. We'll see how it goes. Before we wrap up, there's something I forgot to ask earlier on, which I think it's really important to venture to listeners, and I know Mischon is active there. Venture debt. It's said to be a double-edged sword. How have you seen it pan out with some of your venture-backed startup clients?
Well, we like venture debt, for the right companies. So what's good about it is that it's non-dilutive. If you're growing fast and, in a kind of accretive way and producing value, it totally makes sense. Not every company will be bankable in a traditional sense or of a venture debt sense. So it won't be right for everyone. You've got to have discipline, whenever you take out debt, and you've got to have regards to that debt, when it comes to, fundraising, your exit process, and your cash flow. But there's no reason why it can't be a really viable alternative. If anything, I'm a bit surprised there isn't more of it. But then, venture lenders, it's a high risk category.
Yes.
Because there isn't, it's not asset backed in a sense. It's backed, albeit by cash flows, but by unproven assets, which we haven't, at the time the loan is made, the full potential value of hasn't quite been realized. So it is a high risk category for the lender. I can see why it makes sense for the borrower, but like all kind of external finance, you've got to be satisfied, that it's going to be right for your business. So we do see lots of venture debt, and it's a really important part of the ecosystem.
So we've talked about like the good parts of venture debt. What would you say is one thing or one type of company that should not take venture debt?
Should not.
Yes.
You've got to have some stability in your underlying business. So you've got to have decent and predictable cash flows. And you might think you've got decent and predictable cash flows, but you don't necessarily really know. If you had like strong levels of ARR, annual recurring revenue, in a way that would be appealing to private equity investors, great. You're bankable, so the debt makes sense. If maybe you're a kind of deep tech startup where all the value is in your IP and you don't know what it will be worth yet because the market for it doesn't exist yet, then clearly the venture debt doesn't make sense. So I'm giving you kind of two extremes of the scale there, but that's the continuum around which you make decisions.
I use an example. So in my leverage finance days, some of the best deals we backed were for like telecom towers or tower companies who were sell and leaseback transactions, buying towers from the mobile operators and then leasing it back to them for 10 years. I tell people that is contracted revenue. That is a blue chip client, contracted revenue for 10 years. They need you. They cannot do without you. That is a kind of, if it's close to that, that is good venture backable.
Exactly. I mean, no one's saying you're securitizing around venture debt, but you've got to have a little bit of that about the characteristics of your business.
Yes. So, because I find that founders are not intuitively financially oriented.
Yeah.
So they need a lot of help breaking this down to them. Okay. I just have a few quick fire questions before we wrap up. From your time in this space, what is one myth about venture businesses that you think should be busted?
I think the biggest myth is probably that what's behind a great startup is a great idea and inspiration. There does need to be some ideation, but fundamentally, it's about really, really hard work and resilience and getting stuff done, which are things that, no one really tests you too much on getting stuff done at school. You might be tested on memorization or how to write an essay, but actually physically getting things done, it's that execution skill level that really, really counts and that, marks out the successes from the failures. I think the idea is important, but it's not really the idea that determines the success or not.
Interesting. Non-business, maybe final question to wrap up, similar to how we started. Do you see yourself running a full marathon someday?
Oh, will you do it with me?
Yes. I'm just recovering from my Achilles problem now, but yes, I'm committed to fully recover it. So yes.
Can we do it in Nigeria?
Yes. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been a wonderful conversation, and yes, all the best. I'm looking forward to all the great things that Mischon will do this year.
I love your work, Coyote. Thank you.
Thank you so much.